The champagne was still bubbling when my father demanded $12,000 for my brother's failed tuition. He called it my duty. I called it the end. I didn't just refuse, I pulled out the spreadsheets that exposed their years of lies. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Inherited Revenge. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The silence that followed my father's demand was heavy enough to crush the air out of my lungs. It wasn't a comfortable silence, the kind that settles over a table after a good meal or a shared joke. It was a suffocating, dense vacuum that seemed to suck all the warmth out of the dining room. I looked down at my plate. The roast beef, which had looked so appetizing just moments ago, now seemed gray and unappealing. My stomach churned, a violent twisting sensation that had nothing to do with the food and everything to do with the man sitting at the head of the table. Arthur, my father. He was looking at me with that expression I knew so well, a mixture of expectation and mild annoyance, as if he were waiting for a waitress to refill his water glass rather than asking his daughter to surrender a small fortune. Beside him, my mother, Martha, was meticulously pushing peas around her plate, her eyes fixed on the porcelain pattern as if decoding a secret message. And then there was Noah, my brother. My 21-year-old baby brother, who was currently slumped in his chair, scrolling on his phone, completely unbothered by the bomb our father had just dropped. "Well," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the quiet. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the expensive Merlot I had bought for the occasion. "Did you hear me, Elizabeth? I said Noah's tuition is due next week. The university is being unreasonable about the deadline, as usual. We need $12,000. I gripped the stem of my own glass so hard I feared it might snap. "I heard you," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, thin, stretched tight. "I'm just trying to process why you're telling me this." Arthur chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "I'm not telling you for your health, Lizzie. I'm telling you because you need to write the check. Your mother and I are liquidly challenged at the moment. The market, you know how it is. And Noah needs to focus on his studies, not worrying about finances. It's a family investment." "Investment," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. For the last 5 years, I had been the family's safety net. I had been the one to cover the unexpected medical bills, the sudden car repairs, the emergency roof leaks. I had done it because I loved them. I had done it because I thought they were struggling, honest people caught in a run of bad luck. I had worked 80-hour weeks as a forensic accountant, ruining my eyesight and my social life to make sure my parents could retire in peace. But looking at Arthur now, wearing a new watch that I knew cost more than my first car, sipping wine he didn't pay for, demanding money for a brother who was currently failing 3 out of 4 classes, something inside me fractured. The room felt like it was tilting. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of panic and rage. I was physically ill, nausea rising in waves, but beneath the sickness, a cold, hard clarity was beginning to form. $12,000, I said slowly, for Noah's tuition, after I already paid for his dorm, and his meal plan, and his books. "He's your brother," Arthur said, his tone hardening. He set his glass down with a sharp clink. "Family supports family. You're doing well, you're single, you have no dependents. It's not like you have anything else to spend it on. You must do this, for the family." He didn't ask, he didn't say please. He just demanded, as if my bank account was an extension of his own wallet, as if my labor was his property. I looked at Noah. He finally looked up from his phone, a vague, bored expression on his face. He didn't look grateful. He didn't look ashamed. He looked expectant. That was the moment. The moment the blindfold didn't just slip, it was ripped off. The love I held for them didn't disappear, but it curdled, turning into something sour and burning. I took a deep breath, the air trembling in my chest. "No," I whispered. Arthur blinked, "Excuse me." I said no, I said, louder this time. I looked him dead in the eye. "I won't be paying it." The shock on his face was almost comical, but the ice in my veins was no laughing matter. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the disrespect. It was about the realization that to them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was an ATM with a pulse. The better. Aisle wasn't just in the demand. It was in the absolute certainty that they felt entitled to my life. The word no hung in the air, vibrating like a struck bell. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, each second stretching out into an eternity. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the soundtrack to a bridge burning. Martha finally stopped pushing her peas. She looked up, her face pale, her mouth slightly open. She looked from Arthur to me, her eyes wide with a familiar, terrified pleading. It was the look she always gave me when she wanted me to smooth things over, to be the bigger person, to fix whatever mess Arthur had made. But I remained frozen, my hand still gripping the wine glass. My heart was racing so fast I felt lightheaded, a buzzing static filling my ears. It is a terrifying thing to defy the people who raised you. It goes against every instinct ingrained in you since childhood. The primal fear of rejection, of abandonment, was screaming in the back of my mind. "Just pay it," the voice whispered. "Just pay it and make the tension go away. It's easier. It's safer." But then I looked at my hands. They were trembling. I thought about the panic attacks I'd had last month during tax season. I thought about the vacation I had canceled 3 years in a row because Mom and Dad needed help with the mortgage. I thought about the modest apartment I lived in, despite my high salary, because I was funneling so much cash into their retirement fund. Arthur's face turned a shade of red that clashed with the festive tablecloth. He leaned forward, his elbows digging into the table. "I don't think you understand the situation, Elizabeth. This isn't a request. This is a necessity. If you don't pay, Noah gets kicked out. Is that what you want? You want your brother to be a dropout?" "I want Noah to pass a class," I said, my voice shaking but gaining strength. "I want him to value the education that has already cost me $40,000 over the last 2 years." "He is trying," Martha interjected, her voice high and wavering. "It's hard for him, Elizabeth. You know he gets anxious." "I get anxious too, Mom," I said, looking at her. "I get anxious when I look at my savings account and see it draining away because you two can't seem to stick to a budget." Noah let out a scoff. "God, you're so dramatic. It's just money. You make plenty of it. Why are you being such a bitch about it?" The insult landed with a dull thud. My baby brother, the boy I used to read bedtime stories to, the boy I had bought his first bike for. Arthur slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Don't you speak to your sister like that," he snapped at Noah, but then he immediately turned his fury back to me. "And you, don't you dare lecture us about budgets. We raised you. We fed you. We clothed you. We sacrificed everything for you to get that fancy degree. And now, when we need a little help, you act like we're robbing you? You're ungrateful. That's what you are. Ungrateful and selfish." I felt the tears pricking my eyes, hot and stinging. The accusation of selfishness is the ultimate weapon against a daughter who has spent her life trying to be good. It cuts deep. It's designed to maim. I took a sip of wine, the liquid cool against my parched throat. I needed a moment. I needed to calm the shaking in my hands. They thought this was a negotiation. They thought they could bully me into submission like they always did. They thought I was just throwing a tantrum, that eventually I would pull out my checkbook and sigh and save the day. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten what I did for a living. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on finding things people try to hide. I track hidden assets, I expose embezzlement, I reconstruct shattered financial histories. When they asked me to look over their finances 6 months ago to help them optimize their retirement, they had handed me the keys to their entire financial life. They thought I had just glanced at the numbers and moved on. They didn't know I had kept the files. They didn't know I had seen the credit card statements they thought were buried. They didn't know I had tracked the withdrawals. I wasn't just a daughter sitting at a dinner table anymore. I was an auditor, and the audit was finished. To understand why this moment was shattering me, you have to understand the history. I was always the responsible one, the old soul. While other kids were asking for toys, I was asking for a savings bond. I started working at 16, saving every penny, terrified of the poverty my parents always claimed was just around the corner. "We just don't have it this month, Lizzie," became the anthem of my childhood. I put myself through college on scholarships and 2 part-time jobs. I never asked them for a dime. In fact, the moment I got my first real paycheck, I started sending money home. It started small, grocery money, covering the electric bill. But as my career took off, the requests got bigger. Arthur, my father, was a man who believed the world owed him a living. He had bounced between sales jobs his whole life, always blaming his lack of success on bad managers or a rigged system. He was charming in a slick, surface-level way. He could talk a dog off a meat wagon, but he couldn't keep a ledger balanced to save his life. He was a man obsessed with appearances. He drove a luxury sedan he couldn't afford. He wore tailored suits while the roof leaked, and he groomed me to be his retirement plan. "You're the smart one, Elizabeth," he would say, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You're going to take care of us. That's the deal. We raise you, you raise us up." And then there was Noah. If I was the retirement plan, Noah was the trophy. He was the golden child, the boy who could do no wrong. If Noah failed a test, it was the teacher's fault. If Noah got a speeding ticket, the cop was biased. They coddled him to the point of suffocation. At 21, he didn't know how to do his own laundry. He didn't know how to cook a meal. And he certainly didn't know the value of a dollar because he had never had to earn one. Arthur looked at me now, his face twisting into a sneer that revealed the true nature of his love. "You know," Arthur said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms over his chest. "I was talking to Jim at the club the other day. His daughter just bought him a condo in Florida. A condo. And here I am, begging my daughter for spare change to educate her brother." "The club?" I asked, my voice quiet. "You mean the country club? I thought you canceled that membership years ago because it was too expensive." Arthur waved a hand dismissively. "Networking, Elizabeth. You have to spend money to make money. Something you'd understand if you weren't so obsessed with hoarding every penny." He was wearing a cashmere sweater. I recognized the brand. It cost at least $400. "So," Arthur continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "let's stop the theatrics. Do you have your checkbook, or do you need to transfer it on your phone? The bursar's office opens at 9 a.m. on Monday. I want it cleared by then." He didn't just want my money, he wanted my submission. He wanted me to acknowledge his authority, to validate his worldview that I existed to serve him. He looked at me not with affection, but with the cold calculation of a farmer inspecting a dairy cow. He picked up a piece of bread and buttered it aggressively. "And don't look at your mother like that. She agrees with me. Don't you, Martha?" Martha flinched. She kept her eyes on her plate. We just want what's best for the family, Elizabeth. Noah needs this." "Why can't Noah get a student loan?" I asked. "Loans are predatory," Arthur shouted, spit flying from his lips. "I won't have my son shackled by debt. That's why we have family, so we don't have to rely on banks." "But it's okay for me to be shackled," I asked. "It's okay for me to work 60-hour weeks to pay for his freedom." Arthur laughed. It was a cruel sound. "You like working, you're a grinder, that's who you are. Noah is sensitive. He's creative. He's not built for the grind. He needs time to find himself." There it was, the truth, naked and ugly. I was the workhorse. Noah was the show pony. My suffering was acceptable because it facilitated their comfort. I looked at the man I had called Dad for 32 years. I saw the graying hair, the soft hands that hadn't done a day of hard labor in decades, the eyes that held no warmth, only greed. He had no idea what was in my purse. He had no idea that the black leather folder sitting next to my chair didn't contain work documents. It contained his bank statements from the last 12 months. It contained the credit card bills he thought were electronic only. It contained the truth about where the missing money had gone. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice suddenly very calm. The shaking in my hands had stopped. A cold resolve had settled over me, sharp and deadly. I am a grinder. I am very good at my job. I reached down and picked up the black folder. "And because I'm so good at my job," I said, placing the folder on the table between the roast beef and the gravy boat, "I took a very close look at why you're so broke." Arthur's eyes flicked to the folder. For the first time, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed his face. "What is that?" "That," I said, opening the cover, "is the reason I won't be paying a single cent." The leather of the folder was cool under my fingertips, a stark contrast to the heat rising in my cheeks. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit there on the tablecloth, a black void amidst the festive silverware and crystal glasses. "You asked me to help you, Dad," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammery. NG against my ribs like a trapped bird. "6 months ago, you said the retirement accounts were a mess and you wanted me to work my magic. You gave me the passwords. You gave me the power of attorney for the accounts just in case something happened. Do you remember that?" Arthur scoffed, waving a hand dismissively as he reached for the wine bottle again. "Yes, yes. I wanted you to organize the portfolio. Make sure we were maximizing our returns. I didn't ask you to spy on my personal spending." "That's the thing about forensic accounting," I said, finally flipping the cover open. The sound of the stiff leather bending was the only noise in the room. "You can't separate the portfolio from the spending. It's all one ecosystem. And when I started looking at the investments, I noticed some irregularities, significant ones." I pulled out the first sheet. It was a color-coded spreadsheet, the rows highlighted in neon yellow and angry red. I had spent 3 nights building this, cross-referencing bank statements with credit card bills and ATM withdrawals. It was the kind of work I usually billed $400 an hour for, and here I was, presenting it pro bono to an audience that hated me for it. "You told me 2 weeks ago that you couldn't afford to fix the radiator in the hallway," I said, sliding the paper across the table toward him. "You said you were freezing. You made me feel so guilty that I transferred you $1,500 immediately." Arthur glanced at the paper, then looked away, his jaw tightening. "It was cold, Elizabeth. Your mother catches colds easily." "Look at the date, Dad," I said, pointing to the line item. "October 14th, the day after I sent the money. There is no transaction for a plumber or an HVAC specialist, but there is a transaction for $1,200 at the Gilded Club. That's a luxury cigar lounge downtown, isn't it?" Martha gasped softly. "Arthur." "It was a business meeting," Arthur snapped, his face flushing a deeper shade of red. "I was meeting a potential client. You have to spend money to impress people, Elizabeth. You don't understand how the real world works." "A business meeting," I repeated, pulling out a second sheet. "Okay, let's talk about the bad market that wiped out your savings last year. You told me the tech stocks tanked. You cried on the phone, Dad. You actually cried." I felt a surge of nausea as I remembered that phone call. I had been in the middle of a massive audit for a pharmaceutical company, exhausted and stressed, and I had dropped everything to console him. I had wired them $5,000 that night just to make sure they could pay the mortgage. "Here is the standout from that month," I said, laying the second sheet over the first. "There were no stock sales. In fact, you haven't held a significant tech stock in 5 years. But there was a withdrawal of $8,000 cash from the joint checking account. And coincidentally, 3 days later, there is a social media post from your friend Jerry." I pulled out a printed screenshot. It was a photo of Arthur and his buddy Jerry, grinning like idiots on the deck of a boat, holding fishing rods. The caption read, "Best weekend ever in Cabo, thanks to Artie for the treat." "You didn't lose the money to the market," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You spent it on a fishing trip, while you told me you were eating rice and beans." The transition inside me was complete. The hurt daughter was gone, shoved into a small box in the back of my mind. In her place sat the professional, the strategist. I wasn't pleading with him anymore, I was building a case. I looked at him not as a father, but as a hostile witness who had just perjured himself. I turned to Noah. He was staring at the photo of Dad in Cabo, his mouth slightly agape. "You didn't know about that, did you, Noah?" I asked. "Dad told you he couldn't buy you that new laptop for design class because of inflation. Remember?" Noah looked up at me, then at Dad. "You went to Cabo. You said you were at a conference in Jersey." "It was a networking event," Arthur roared, slamming his fist on the table. The wine in his glass sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth like blood. "I am the head of this family. I do not have to explain every cent I spend to my children. I earned that money. I have worked for 40 years. "You haven't worked a full-time job in 6 years, Arthur," Martha whispered. The room went dead silent. We all turned to look at Mom. She was still staring at her plate, her hands trembling in her lap. She had never, in my entire life, contradicted him in public. "What did you say?" Arthur hissed, turning on her with a predator's speed. "I said you haven't worked," she said, her voice shaking but audible. "You leave the house every day, but the paycheck stopped coming a long time ago. I thought you were consulting. I thought the money was just tight." I looked at my mother, seeing her properly for the first time in years. She wasn't just an enabler, she was a victim of the same con. She had buried her head in the sand because the reality was too terrifying to face. "He's not consulting, Mom," I said gently. "I checked the tax returns. He hasn't reported income since 2019. I turned back to Arthur. He was cornered, and like any cornered animal, he was about to lash out. But I wasn't done. I had found something else during my investigation. Something that wasn't just about wasted money, but about a calculated betrayal that involved the very tuition he was demanding now. "I decided to dig a little deeper yesterday," I said, reaching for the thickest stack of papers in the folder. "Because the math just wasn't adding up. Even with the cigars and the fishing trips, you should have had enough for Noah's tuition. So I called the bursar's office at Noah's university." Arthur went pale. The bluster drained out of him instantly. "You have no right," he whispered. "I'm the emergency contact," I said. They were very happy to speak with me. They told me something very interesting about the tuition payment for this semester. "Don't," Arthur warned, his voice low and dangerous. He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. "If you say another word, Elizabeth, you can leave this house and never come back." "Sit down, Dad," I said, not moving a muscle. "Because if I leave, I take my car with me. The one in the driveway, the one you drive to your meetings. It's in my name, the lease is under my credit. You miss one payment, which you have 3 times this year, forcing me to cover it, and I have the legal right to repossess it." Arthur froze. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He looked at the keys sitting on the sideboard, then back at me. He sat down slowly, defeated by the leverage he had forgotten I held. "Good," I said. "Now about the bursar's office." I looked directly at Noah. "Noah, did you know that your tuition was actually paid 2 months ago?" Noah blinked, confusion wrinkling his forehead. "What? No, the portal says there's a hold on my account. Dad said the check bounced because of a bank error." "There was a payment," I corrected. "A check for $12,000 was deposited into your student account on November 1st. It cleared. You were fully paid up for the spring semester." "Then why?" Noah trailed off, looking at Arthur. "Because on November 15th, I continued, pulling out a printout of the university's transaction history, a request for a refund was processed. The request claimed that the student had withdrawn from the semester. The funds were returned, not to the original payment method, but to a different account. A personal checking account ending in 4490. I held up the paper. "That is Dad's personal fun money account, the one he thinks I don't know about." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a reality shattering. You withdrew my tuition?" Noah's voice was barely a whisper. You told me the school lost the money. You told me they were incompetent. I went to the dean's office and screamed at them, Dad. I looked like an idiot. I needed the liquidity, Arthur shouted, abandoning all pretense of denial. He threw his hands up, his face twisted in a grimace of self-righteousness. It was a temporary loan. I had a sure thing, a crypto investment that was going to triple in a week. I was going to put the money back before the semester started, and none of you would have been the wiser. I was doing it for us, to build wealth. Crypto, I said, letting the word hang there like a foul smell. You gambled your son's education on a crypto tip, and when it crashed, because of course it crashed, you didn't own up to it. You didn't apologize. You waited until New Year's Eve, invited me to dinner, and tried to guilt me into replacing the money you stole. I didn't steal it, Arthur yelled. It's my money, I am the father, everything in this house is mine. It was a student loan disbursement, I said coldly. That money came from the federal government, Dad. It was earmarked for education. Taking it under false pretenses, falsifying a withdrawal to get a refund, that's fraud. That's federal wire fraud. Martha let out a sob, covering her mouth with her napkin. Arthur, tell me you didn't. Oh, stop crying, Martha, he snapped at her. I did what I had to do, and if little Miss Perfect here wasn't so obsessed with ruining me, she would just write the check and fix it. She has the money. She has a savings account with 6 figures in it. I saw her statement last year. You went through my mail, I asked, though I wasn't surprised. I have a right to know, he screamed. You're hoarding wealth while your family suffers. It's immoral. Suffering, I laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. You're not suffering, Dad, you're losing, and you want me to sub. Sidey's your losses. I turned to Noah. He looked devastated. The golden child veneer was cracking. He wasn't the prince of the family anymore. He was just another victim of Arthur's narcissism. The $12,000 isn't for tuition, Noah, I said gently. The tuition is gone, vaporized. If I give him this money, it won't go to the school. It will go to cover the margin call on his crypto account. I saw the demand letter in his email trash folder. Noah stood up. He was shaking. You stole my loan money. I could go to jail if the school finds out I lied about withdrawing. Nobody is going to jail, Arthur barked. Elizabeth is going to pay it, and we are going to move on. No, I said, I'm not. You have to, Arthur lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table again. If you don't pay, Noah gets kicked out. Do you hate your brother that much? I don't hate him, I said. I pity him, because he thinks you're protecting him when really you're using him as a shield. I stood up, gathering the papers. I had one more card to play, the biggest one, the one that would end this farce permanently. Arthur was panting now, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for a weapon or an exit. He was losing control of the narrative, and for a man like him, that was a fate worse than death. You think you're so smart, he spat, wiping sweat from his upper lip. You think you can just come in here with your little spreadsheets and destroy this family? You're nothing without us. We made you. You made me anxious, I corrected. You made me a workaholic. You made me believe that love was transactional. And you know what? You were right. It is transactional, and you're overdrawn. I picked up the last document from the folder. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a property deed. You mentioned earlier that you sacrificed everything for this house, I said. That this is your house. It is my house, Arthur bellowed. My name is on the door. Actually, I said, it's not anymore. I watched the confusion wash over him. He genuinely didn't remember. Or perhaps he had lied to himself so many times that he had rewritten history. 3 years ago, I said, keeping my voice level, when the bank was threatening foreclosure because you hadn't paid the mortgage in 6 months. Do you remember who saved you? Arthur's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I did, I answered for him. But I didn't just give you the money, Dad. The bank wouldn't refinance with you on the title because your credit score was in the 400s, so we made a deal. I paid the arrears. I took over the mortgage, and you signed the quitclaim deed. I held up the copy of the deed. My name, Elizabeth Vance, was printed clearly at the top as the sole owner. I own this house, I said. I pay the mortgage, I pay the property taxes, I pay the insurance. You live here because I allow it. Because I thought, despite everything, that you were just bad with money, not malicious. I am your father, he screamed, his voice cracking. It's a technicality, a paper formality. It's a legal reality, I countered, my voice finally rising to match his volume. Just like the lease on the car is a legal reality, just like the fraud you committed with Noah's tuition is a legal reality. I looked at Martha. She was weeping silently, her face buried in her hands. Mom, I said, I know you signed the papers too. You've been living in a house I pay for, driving a car I pay for, eating food bought with money I send you, and you sat there tonight and watched him demand $12,000 more from me. You watched him bully me? Why? Martha looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and tragic. He said he would fix it. He said he just needed one more win. There are no wins, Mom, I shouted. There is only the hole, and he is digging it deeper every single day. I turned back to Arthur. Here is how this is going to go. This is my counteroffer. I dropped the deed back onto the table. 1. I am stopping the monthly allowance immediately. The stipend is over. You are two able-bodied adults. Get jobs. I don't care if it's greeting people at Walmart or flipping burgers. You will earn your own money. I can't work at Walmart, Arthur gasped, clutching his chest theatrically. I have high blood pressure. I have status in this community. Your status is a lie, I said. 2. The car. You have until tomorrow morning to clean it out. I'm taking it. I'm selling it to recoup some of the losses you've caused me. You can't leave me without a car. Take the bus, I said, or walk. It's good for high blood pressure. 3, I continued, looking at Noah. Noah, I am not paying your tuition. Noah flinched, looking like he'd been slapped. Liz, please. No, I said firmly. I'm not giving him the money to squander on crypto, but if you are willing to press charges for the heft of your loan funds, or if you can get the administration to understand what happened without implicating yourself in the fraud, I will help you legally. I will help you fill out the FAFSA as an independent student. I will help you get a job, but I will not give a single penny to this man. I pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. And finally, I said, the house, you have 90 days. The room seemed to spin. Arthur looked like he was having a stroke. What? 90 days, I repeated. To start paying me rent, market rate, or to move out. I am done subsidizing your delusions. Arthur stared at me. For a moment, I thought he might attack me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. But then, the bully crumbled. He slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands, and began to weep. Not real tears of remorse. Loud, performative, manipulative sobs intended to make me feel like a monster. My own daughter, he wailed. Throwing me on the street, after all I did for her, ungrateful, cruel. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no fear, just a profound sense of exhaustion and the cool clarity of a balance sheet that finally balanced. I'm not cruel, Dad, I said, picking up my purse and the black folder. I'm just closing the account. I turned to leave, but Noah's voice stopped me. Wait, he whispered. I turned back. Noah was standing up. He looked at our father, sobbing theatrically into his hands, and then at the spreadsheet still lying on the table, the proof of the lie that had almost cost him his future. Wait, what? Noah said, looking at the spreadsheet again, his eyes widening as the reality finally sank in. He spent my loan money on a crypto scam. It wasn't a question, it was an awakening. The silence in the dining room following Noah's whispered realization didn't last long. It was shattered by Arthur's desperate, furious attempt to regain control of the narrative. He didn't apologize. He didn't break down in shame. Instead, he doubled down, launching into a tirade that would ultimately seal his fate. It wasn't a scam, Arthur roared, his face turning a mottled purple. He jabbed a finger toward Noah. It was a calculated risk, a bridge loan. I was going to double your money, you ungrateful little brat. I was doing it for you. I watched Noah. For the first time in his life, the fog of entitlement was lifting. He looked from the terrified expression on our mother's face to the spreadsheet on the table, the cold, hard data that proved his father had cannibalized his future for a gamble. You stole it, Noah said, his voice gaining volume. You forged my signature on the withdrawal request. That's what Liz is saying. You committed a felony in my name. I am your father, Arthur bellowed, slamming his hand on the table again. I own your name, I gave it to you. I grabbed my purse. I'm leaving, I announced, my voice cutting through the noise. Noah, if you want a ride, get in the car. Dad, you have until 9:00 a.m. tomorrow to hand over the keys to the sedan. If you don't, I'm reporting it stolen. I walked out. I didn't wait to see if they followed. I needed fresh air. I needed to get away from the toxic gravity of that house before it crushed me. I drove home in a daze, my phone exploding with notifications. Arthur hadn't wasted a second. By the time I reached my apartment, I had voicemails from my Aunt Sarah, my Uncle Robert, and even my cousin in Ohio. Arthur had spun a web of lies faster than I could drive 5 miles. He told them I had come over drunk. He told them I had threatened to evict them because I was jealous of Noah. He told them I was having a mental breakdown. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen island, staring at the black folder, drinking coffee, and preparing for war. I knew Arthur. He wouldn't give up the keys. He would escalate. He would try to use public shame to force me back into line. He called for an emergency family meeting the next morning at the house. He thought he was summoning a firing squad to execute my character. He didn't realize he was assembling a jury for his own trial. When I pulled into the driveway the next morning at 8:55 a.m., the house was already full. Uncle Robert's Mercedes was there. Aunt Sarah's van was parked on the lawn. My heart hammered in my throat, a thick pulse of anxiety. This was the public showdown Arthur wanted. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the people whose opinions I had been trained to value. I stepped out of my car. I had brought backup, but not the kind he expected. I had a tow truck waiting around the corner on standby. I walked into the living room. The atmosphere was stifling. My parents were sitting on the sofa, holding hands like martyrs facing a lion. Aunt Sarah stood by the fireplace, her arms crossed, looking at me with deep disappointment. Uncle Robert, a successful real estate attorney who had always intimidated me, sat in the armchair, checking his watch. Elizabeth, Aunt Sarah began, her tone dripping with judgment. Your father tells us you've lost your mind, threatening to evict your own parents, calling the police on your brother's tuition. We're very concerned about your mental state. Arthur looked at me with a triumphant smirk. He thought he had won. He thought the weight of family tradition would crush my facts. I didn't threaten to call the police on the tuition, I said calmly, refusing to take a seat. I stated a fact. The tuition was stolen. Arthur said it was a banking error, Sarah snapped. He said you're refusing to help fix it because you're bitter about Noah getting into private school. I looked at Uncle Robert. He was the only one in the room who understood the language of money. Uncle Robert, I said, ignoring Sarah. You're a lawyer. You understand wire fraud, correct? Robert looked up, his eyes narrowing. Elizabeth, don't use legal terms you don't understand. This is a family dispute. I'm a forensic accountant, Robert, I said, my voice sharp. I don't use terms I don't understand. I use terms I can prove. I walked over to him and dropped a new document on his lap. It wasn't the spreadsheet this time. It was the chain of custody for the funds. Look at the transaction ID, I commanded. Trace the routing number. That is a federal student loan disbursement entering Noah's account. And that, I pointed to the next line, is a transfer to an offshore crypto exchange platform called Bitrally. The account holder for the exchange is Arthur Vance. Robert picked up the paper. The room went silent. I watched his eyes scan the lines. I saw the moment his lawyer brain took over. His posture stiffened. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at the date, then at the amount, then at the destination. "Arthur," Robert said, his voice dangerously quiet, "what is this?" "It's nothing," Arthur shouted, standing up. "It's just paperwork she forged. She's crazy, Rob, she's always been jealous." "These are bank-certified wire traces," Robert said, looking at his brother with a mixture of horror and disgust. "You can't forge these without hacking the bank's mainframe. Arthur, did you wire federal loan money to a gambling site?" "It was an investment," Arthur screamed, the vein in his forehead bulging. "I was going to pay it back." "And the car?" I asked, turning to Aunt Sarah. "He told you I was stealing his car? The lease is in my name, Sarah. I've paid every single payment for 3 years. He has missed the insurance payment for 6 months. If he crashes, I get sued. I lose my license. I lose my certification." I pulled out the lease agreement and the overdue notices. I held them up for the room to see. "He isn't a victim," I announced, my voice ringing off the walls. "He is a liability, and he has dragged all of you here to try and bully me into covering up a felony." Aunt Sarah looked at the papers, then at Martha. "Martha, is this true? Did he really take the boys' school money?" Martha was sobbing openly now. She couldn't look anyone in the eye. Her silence was the most damning confession of all. Then the final blow came. We heard a thumping sound from the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. We all turned. Noah was coming down the stairs. He was dragging 2 large suitcases behind him. He was wearing his backpack. He looked tired, pale, and utterly done. "Noah," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "Son, where are you going?" Noah didn't look at him. He looked at me. "I'm ready, Liz," Noah said. "Ready for what?" Arthur demanded, stepping toward him. "You're not going anywhere. We have to fix this. Your sister is lying to everyone." Noah stopped. He dropped the handle of his suitcase. He looked at Arthur, really looked at him, with eyes that were devoid of the adoration Arthur had fed on for 20 years. "She's not lying, Dad," Noah said. His voice wasn't loud, but it silenced the room. "I checked my email. I found the confirmation from the registrar. You withdrew me. You pretended to be me. You impersonated me on the phone." Noah reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. "House keys." "I'm not going to let you ruin my life so you can feel like a big shot," Noah said. He tossed the keys onto the coffee table. They landed with a heavy, final metal clatter. "I'm going with Elizabeth." Arthur looked like he had been shot. You can't leave. I did everything for you. I am the only one who believes in you." "You don't believe in me," Noah said, picking up his suitcase again. "You just bet on me, and you lost." Noah walked past his father, past his weeping mother, past the stunned aunts and uncles, and stood next to me. "Let's go," he said to me. I looked at Uncle Robert. He was still holding the bank records, staring at his brother with a look of absolute revulsion. "The tow truck is 5 minutes out," I said to Arthur. "Leave the keys in the ignition, or I charge you for the locksmith." I turned and walked out the door, my brother at my side, leaving the wreckage of my parents' reputation burning behind us. The drive to my apartment was silent for the first 10 minutes. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal. I watched Noah out of the corner of my eye. He was staring out the window, watching the suburbs roll by, the only world he had ever known, now disappearing in the rearview mirror. I knew that look. It was the look of someone whose entire reality had just been reformatted. It was painful, yes, but it was necessary. "I didn't know," Noah said finally, his voice thick. He didn't turn his head. "I swear, Liz, I thought he was just strict. I didn't know he was that." "I know," I said softly. "He spent a lifetime making sure you didn't know. That was his full-time job, managing the illusion." "I feel stupid," he whispered. "I feel like such a leech. You paid for everything, my dorm, my food, and I treated you like—" He choked on the words. "I treated you like you owed it to me." "You were programmed to think that way," I said. "But you're deprogramming yourself now. That's what matters." We spent the next 3 months rebuilding our lives from the ground up. It wasn't easy. The emotional fallout was messy, but the financial cleanup was surgical. I was in my element. First, the car. The tow truck driver had collected it without incident. Arthur had been too busy being screamed at by Uncle Robert to put up a fight. I sold it to a dealership the next day. The proceeds covered the remaining lease balance and left me with a small check, which I deposited directly into a new savings account I opened for Noah. Next, the tuition. This was the hardest part. We had a long, difficult meeting with the university administration. I sat beside Noah as he explained, with humiliating honesty, what his father had done. We presented the wire traces. We presented the affidavit of fraud. Because Noah agreed to cooperate with the investigation against Arthur, the school made an exception. They reinstated his enrollment status, classifying him as a victim of identity theft. It was a bureaucratic nightmare, but we waded through the paperwork together, page by page. I helped him file for independent student status, severing his financial ties to our parents so their income, or lack thereof, would no longer impact his aid eligibility. Then came the house. I didn't want to evict them. Despite everything, the idea of my parents on the street made my stomach turn. But I couldn't be their landlord, and I certainly couldn't be their bank. I gave them the 90 days. They didn't pay. On day 91, I listed the house for sale. Arthur threatened to sue. He sent me long, rambling emails in all caps, quoting maritime laws and conspiracy theories he'd found on the internet. He called me a thief. He called me a demon, but he didn't have a lawyer. Uncle Robert had washed his hands of him. When the for sale sign went up in the yard, the fight finally went out of them. They moved out 2 weeks before closing. The last I heard, they had moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, a place they could actually afford on Arthur's meager Social Security and the part-time job Martha finally got as a receptionist at a dental office. It was a humble life, a real life. The kind of life they should have been living for 20 years instead of pretending to be aristocracy on my dime. I haven't spoken to Arthur since the day of the intervention. Martha calls sometimes, usually when Arthur isn't around. She sounds tired, she sounds sad, but she also sounds grounded. For the first time, she isn't trying to sell me a lie. She's just living in the truth. As for Noah, he didn't go back to the dorms immediately. He stayed on my couch for a month. We learned how to be siblings again. We cooked dinner together, cheap pasta mostly, but we paid for it ourselves. We watched movies. We talked about things other than Dad's investments. He got a job at the campus library. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay much, but the first time he brought home a paycheck, he framed the stub. He bought me a coffee with his own money. It was the best cup of coffee I have ever tasted. One rainy Tuesday evening, about 6 months after the New Year's massacre, as we now called it, I came home from work to find Noah studying at my kitchen table. The apartment was quiet. The air was light. There was no dread, no looming demand, no fear of the phone ringing. I put my bag down and looked at the black leather folder, which now sat on a high shelf collecting dust. It was closed. The case was closed. Noah looked up from his textbook. He looked older, tired around the eyes, but his shoulders were set back. He looked like a man, not a boy. "Hey," he said, "I was just looking at the budget you made me. I think if I pick up 2 extra shifts next month, I can start paying you back for the lawyer fees." I smiled, pouring myself a glass of wine, a cheap bottle, because I was saving for my own vacation this year. A real one. "Don't worry about the fees," I said, taking a sip. "Consider it an investment, but this time, it's an investment with a guaranteed return." I wasn't paying for his life anymore, but I was finally, truly part of it, and that was worth more than $12,000.